Okay, here we go. Good afternoon. All right, the loyal few have returned from the General Dynamics Mission Systems reception. I hope you enjoyed that. If you have the opportunity to thank our friends from General Dynamics Mission Systems, tell them that. We certainly appreciate that. Well, we had a great morning hearing from General Brown and two great panels and a Tech 10 presentation, and now we kick off the afternoon with an extraordinarily talented, experienced afternoon keynote speaker. Lieutenant General Rick Burr, many of you know, Chief of Army Staff for Australia, but also, as we were just chatting, and many of you know, the first non-U.S. Deputy Commander at U.S. Army Pacific, working with then General Wiercinski and then General Brooks. So, General Burr, we're very honored that you've rejoined us here in Hawaii. I suspect you have many friends still from those days. We look forward to your remarks. And General Burr is very graciously he agreed to accept a few questions at the end of his remarks. So Michael will be around with the question card. So tee up your challenging questions for Lieutenant General Rick Burr. General Burr, off to you, sir.
Aloha and g'day. It is great to be back here in Hawaii and great to be part of the back here as part of the USAPAC team. And can I just say how great it is to see so many friends from here in USAPAC and across PACOM, but also from around the region. Many familiar faces. And it is great to be back here in your company and be back here together to have the opportunity just to catch up and strengthen those personal relationships, which are so important in our business. I was here for the very first LANPAC in 2013 as the DCG. So can I commend General Ham and the AUSA for your ongoing leadership as an association and for the cause that you represent, for the men and women in service, but also for the sponsorship of this forum, where it does bring together the people from around the region, but also for the industry partners, the academic partners, the people that are involved in our broader defence community. It is an enterprise, and it is all about partnerships, and that will certainly be a theme. Can I also extend my appreciation to those in the audience who attended the Australian Army Land Forces seminar in Adelaide last year. Thank you for your participation, or those of your Army or your organisation that did participate. It's a very successful activity, and may I take this platform, this opportunity to issue a warning order for Australian Land Forces for 2020, which will be held in Brisbane in 1, 2 and 3 September next year. So please put that in your calendar. These opportunities, whether it be a LANPAC, Australian Army Land Forces seminar, a PAC-PAMS in Thailand later this year, are important for us all to come together and have that repeated opportunity to engage. General Brown, who's just walked in, can I extend my thanks to you for your leadership of USAPAC, but also this initiative, and thank you for your ongoing support to the Australian Army and indeed all of the armies represented here through your focus in the region. Long-standing ally, last year Australia and the US celebrated 100 years of mateship. A great initiative. It takes us right back to our early origins of fighting together in World War I. And the alliance today remains the cornerstone of our defence strategy. On Saturday, Australia had its federal election, and we now can confirm that there will be a continuation of the previous government for the next 3 years, as they have been re-elected with a majority. So for this audience, essentially a continuity of defence policy can be expected. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. The focus of my address is on Australia's approach to the Indo-Pacific. And I'm conscious, obviously, that the audience here today is already well aware of the strategic importance of this region. The fact that we conduct events such as this is a testament to that fact. Already this morning we've heard about some of those fundamental elements that make up the Indo-Pacific as an area of great opportunity as well as a potential source of threat. Specifically, General Brown and the panel discussions have provided great context on the economic vitality, impacts of a growing population, and the concentration of commercial shipping that flows through this important region. Similarly, we know that the Indo-Pacific enjoys the world's greatest information density, social media connectivity, and e-commerce volume. Overlaid across these socio-economic factors are a complex web of geopolitical relationships that continue to exist simultaneously in conflict, competition and cooperation. It is no wonder that Australia's Defence Minister last year stated that the Indo-Pacific is a system made up of geopolitical relationships, a system where major changes in one part affect what happens in other political, military, economic, social, informational and infrastructure parts of the wider Indo-Pacific system. So what does this mean for us all here today? Well, firstly, while we all operate in a unique national context, we share common interests and challenges. It also means that strong partnerships across the region will continue to be extremely important to the collective security and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific. We act better as a collective through shared understanding, cooperation and respect. It is in this context that I will provide some insights into Australia's approach to the Indo-Pacific and specifically the Australian Army's contribution to this endeavour. To achieve this, I will talk to three key themes: our national context, Australia's approach to an open and prosperous Indo-Pacific, our focus on strong army-to-army partnerships in the region as part of this approach, and what accelerating change in our region means for the design and ethos for our army. So what is the Australian approach to an open and prosperous Indo-Pacific? We advocate and seek to protect an international order in which relationships between states are governed by international law and other rules and norms. We are pragmatic. We do not seek to impose values on others. However, Australia is a determined advocate of liberal institutions, universal values and human rights. At the core of it, Australia seeks an Indo-Pacific that is stable and prosperous. Australia continues to be committed to a range of measures to strengthen Australia's partnerships with other Indo-Pacific nations. We live here together. We are neighbours, friends and partners. Like all Indo-Pacific nations, Australia cannot escape geography, demographics, climate or history. We live with the reality of a more strategically crowded region. Natural disasters and climate change, drugs and arms trafficking, piracy, illegal fishing, conflict and terrorism are additional complications. With such diversity and complexity across this broad part of the world, there must be accepted norms and laws. Without such measures, the system will not function. Australia also understands that we achieve the best results when we listen and when we work at a pace that allows all to remain comfortable. It is about shared respect and long-term, meaningful partnerships. Australia seeks regional interactions that contribute to stability, to security, to unconditional national sovereignty, and to sustainable and resilient economies. Australia is always a willing partner in the democratic process. Indeed, in recent months, at the request of the Solomon Islands caretaker government, Australia and New Zealand provided support during their elections to solve some of the practical problems associated with a dispersed population and demanding geography. This included logistics, communication and contingency planning support and support to help transport election materials and personnel to regional centres during the polling period. Australia also provided police support to the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force to assist the planning and delivery of policing services during the election. Advisors from our Electoral Commission supported the Solomon Islands Electoral Commission to raise voter awareness and uphold the democratic principles. This is one example of our partnered approach. It demonstrates that Australia seeks to work in partnership across whole of government as we assist our friends. Whilst the Australian Army is prepared to lead in these partnerships, we recognise that this will not always be the case. Therefore, being comfortable working within the joint and interagency environment is essential for our Army's contribution to the region. Australia embraces practical ways to support sovereign capacity building in partnership with our neighbours. There is a strong consensus that significant infrastructure investment is needed to support growing populations and increasing trade throughout the Indo-Pacific. Although estimates vary as to the magnitude, this clearly presents an opportunity for nations to work holistically and collaboratively. For example, in late 2018, Papua New Guinea invited Australia, Japan, New Zealand and the United States to work together in support of their aim of raising reliable access to electricity from 13% to 70% of all Papua New Guineans by 2030. Australia is also collaborating with Papua New Guinea, Fiji and Vanuatu on other sovereign infrastructure projects. Through a mutually agreed partnership between governments, the Australian Defence Department is assisting in the redevelopment of the Papua New Guinea Defence Force's Lombrum Navy Base on Manus Island, the Republic of Fiji Military Forces Black Rock Peacekeeping and Humanitarian and Disaster Relief Camp, and the upgrade of Vanuatu's mobile force infrastructure at Cook Barracks and Luganville. These facilities, when realised, will expand the capacity of our neighbours to their benefit and to the international community's benefit when we think of the effective contributions of United Nations peacekeeping operations around the world. The impetus for these infrastructure agreements is our government's increased focus on the Indo-Pacific. The Pacific Step Up, as it's known, is a whole-of-government program that strengthens our already long-standing and comprehensive engagement program that reorganises and better coordinates our activities in the region. This foundation of deliberate engagement also enables more dynamic responses to the unpredictable and increasingly frequent natural disasters that pervade our region. Australia has shown ourselves ready to lend a hand in these times of need. We offer aid and assistance during a time of crisis. This is what friends and neighbours do. Conducting these operations is part of who we are as an army, as a defence force and nation. We protect and support people. It brings out our best. Defence Force logistics, health and C2 capabilities deliver capacity, speed of response and are capable of withstanding difficult environments. It is important that nations practice the deployment of these capabilities within the region. Indo-Pacific Endeavour 2019, our exercise, has recently provided an outstanding opportunity to do this. This is the most recent edition of an annual program that employs our highly capable landing helicopter dock ships with relevant embarked capabilities across the Indo-Pacific. This regional engagement activity, similar to USAPAC's Pacific Pathways, allows our joint force to connect with partners on their own soil. This year included training with regional partners in India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore and Indonesia in a single continuous deployment. Learning how to operate in local conditions and connecting with the people who live in our region makes us stronger and better partners. It makes us a more capable and connected Army. There is a distinct role for our Army within the scope of Australia's approach to the Indo-Pacific. While I acknowledge the vital importance of all components of the Joint Force, there are simply unique roles that soldiers on the land must do. A contemporary example of such a mission has been the counter-terrorism training in the Philippines. Following the siege in Marawi in Mindanao, the governments of Philippines and Australia agreed to work together to build enhanced capability to counter extremist threats. The Australian Army offered our contemporary experience of conducting operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, fighting Daesh and the Taliban. We trained together and we learned much from this mutual exchange of concepts and hard-earned knowledge. We might offer learning to others, but we always learn so much more in return. That is what partnership is about. I would note here that our Army-to-Army operational engagements are not restricted to activities within the Indo-Pacific region itself, but extend to third locations, whether it be working with our New Zealand friends training with the Iraqi Army in Iraq or working together with Fiji on peacekeeping operations in the Sinai. Working together on the global stage highlights the strength of our multinational and multilateral partnerships here at home. Our new dedicated Pacific Support Company will continue to work with Southwest Pacific Island nations to better understand requirements and support capacity building and resilience efforts. This approach will strengthen preparedness and is focused on people. The idea of preparedness and people are, I believe, fused together. Through training, exercising and education, we continue to develop an appreciation for our environment and the rich cultures within the region. The strength of military relationships in ensuring a stable region cannot be overstated. Mutual respect, enhanced capability and shared learning leading to deeper understanding is fundamental. The initiatives I've just described are important work, but friendships are not just built on work. Most friends work and socialise together. Our Army, our people, strengthen relationships through sport, cultural events, music and religion. The ability to share an interest inspires vibrant and tangible connections between communities in Australia and with our partners. Just recently, our Army Band and our rugby teams enjoyed music, sport and camaraderie in Tonga. These activities and rich cultural experiences generate priceless goodwill and support from communities and exponentially grow our people. Australia puts great stead in the power of cooperation and friendship to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. At the same time, our militaries must keep a clear eye on the unlikely but dangerous. For this reason, our Army must be institutionally prepared for war. We do not seek it, but we are obliged to be prepared for it. Technology, competitive geopolitics, ideology and resource scarcity have always and will continue to drive the form or character of warfare. The rate of change is increasing. In the Australian Army, we have termed this phenomena accelerated warfare. In fact, accelerated warfare is the title of our Army's futures statement. We have identified the challenges we will face, many of which were addressed in the panel discussions earlier today. we must operate across cooperation, competition and conflict in all domains, up close and at distance. Accelerated warfare demands continuous modernisation, adaptation and innovation. Government direction has focused the Australian Defence Force on maintaining a technological edge over potential adversaries on land, at sea, in the air and increasingly in space and cyberspace. 10 years ago, we might have described these last two domains as emerging, but they have now quite clearly emerged. These efforts emphasise the joint force and coherent whole-of-force thinking about investment, the role of industry and research, and interoperability. The Australian Navy is deep into developing a maritime capability not seen in Australia since the Second World War. This recapitalisation will acquire a fleet of 55 leading-edge vessels, submarines, frigates and patrol vessels. These new vessels will complement the current fleet, which includes the landing helicopter docks, ships employed on regional exercises and humanitarian aid and disaster response operations. Australia's Air Force is oriented on the introduction into service of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter. This aircraft adds to the current and planned capabilities, including Super Hornet, Growler, the E-7 Wedgetail with its advanced air battle space management capabilities, and the P-8 Poseidon and MQ-4 Triton UAS for enhanced maritime surveillance. In addition, our Air Force possesses a highly capable transport fleet of C-17, C-130 and C-27. These capabilities have not just enabled us, but also our partners in the Indo-Pacific to achieve their needs, including the recent movement of a critical Vietnamese health facility to South Sudan by C-17. Our ability to assist in this way, in support of friends, is a great shared benefit of these aircraft. Army benefits directly from the modernisation of our sister services. A strong Australian Defence Force is good for our Army. Our Army is also acquiring new capabilities. My priorities are for us to be more connected, protected, lethal and enabled, and to operate at the speed and scale demanded by accelerated warfare. We need to think and operate as systems. And we need to be not just joint by design, but integrated by design. We have to think like this throughout the entire capability development cycle. Army's protected manoeuvre capability will be enhanced through the acquisition of the Boxer 8x8 combat reconnaissance vehicle, for example, but it must be more than just a new CRV. It will be a node on the network, fully connected, enabling and leveraging effects from all other domains. For this reason, our network and battle management system are my #1 priority. Army must also become more lethal in the future through land-based fires, enabling effects in all other domains. I am pleased with our recently approved Integrated Air and Missile Defence project, and together with the project to acquire long-range fires will ensure that the Army supports the Joint Force and creates dilemmas for adversaries through cross-domain engagement. Our modest-sized Army and Defence Force has invested deeply in ensuring that we have an effective amphibious capability, offering enormous regional versatility. The image behind me shows one of our landing helicopter docks, the HMAS Canberra, and on the deck, the Australian Army Tiger Armed Reconnaissance Helicopter. This capability, the deployment of our armed helicopters on an Australian ship, represents how far our joint force has come in recent times. Our Army is increasingly required to contribute to cyber defence and operations in the information domain, and new investments in information warfare will be necessary. Generating these capabilities is challenging the traditional modes of recruiting and remuneration, but it is also driving innovations across our workforce, turning risk into opportunity. Our future force will also need to understand and employ robotics and autonomous systems and make use of data analytics and machine learning to enhance decision-making. The Australian Army is actively exploring these ideas through a robotics and autonomous systems strategy released late last year. This has set our requirements for experiments, trials and development, and partnerships with Australia's industry and scientific communities is the foundation of this work. If this has a familiar ring to it, I would not be surprised. I think most of us are confronting the problem of integrating multiple domains into a single joint force and a single coherent operational concept. Seminars, conferences and exercises are opportunities to confront these challenges together. In July this year, the Australia and US bilateral exercise, Talisman Sabre, also offers an opportunity to do so. Talisman Sabre is designed to practice our respective military services and associated agencies in planning and conducting combined and joint task force operations and improve the combat readiness and interoperability between Australian and US forces. This year, we are grateful to have a total of approximately 25,000 participants, including forces from New Zealand, Canada, the United Kingdom and Japan. Having described Army's modernisation, I'm conscious of falling into the trap of assuming that technological superiority alone is sufficient for superiority in war and warfare. It rarely is. We should routinely remind ourselves that people, ideas and application matter most. Our people are our army. They lead, inspire and make a difference where it matters. They are our competitive advantage. Over the past 12 months, we have invested our intellectual energy in understanding the implications of accelerated warfare for the design and ethos of our army. We are coming to a point where our articulation of Army's contribution to defence strategy is close to finalisation. Expressing our value proposition in this way highlights the fact that our Army is always on and always ready to respond should conflict arise or should a disaster strike. We will describe our imperatives of being a credible combat force, a partnered force, a people force, and a joint and integrated force. These attributes reinforce the joint force need and maximise our value proposition. We have wrestled with the ambiguity imposed by warfare in cyber and information domains, the ability of adversaries to change shape or form, or incrementally increase and calibrate violence to narratives and deception that at times defy traditional military responses. Our strongest realisation was that our Army must be continually in motion to prevail in this disruptive environment, managing current readiness while at the same time proactively adapting to be ready in the future. Our ethos and mindset is an army in motion. An army in motion is open to always learning and comfortably contests and develops the ideas about how it fights. An army in motion willingly experiments with new technology, adopting those that work and discarding those that do not, but always in the context of seeking an untapped potential advantage. An army in motion institutionalises physical, cultural and moral development of our people. Organisations in motion change the shape and makeup of teams quickly and confidently. Army to defence, army to partners and allies, creating people-to-people connections that span nationality, belief systems and culture to build strong teams oriented around shared purpose. The central dimension of Army in Motion is to be ready now and future ready. The dynamic tension between balancing preparedness for the requirements of today and what we need to do differently to meet the challenges of tomorrow. Army uses this framework to prioritise resources and assess risk when making capability investment decisions. Army in Motion also prescribes the framework through which we consider our own organisation in simple and cogent terms: preparedness, people, profession, potential and partnerships, the 5 Ps. Our mission is one of preparedness. Our people are our competitive advantage. We are grounded in our profession and use this to achieve our potential. And we do these things collaboratively and with partners. And to enhance the ability of our people to be in perpetual motion, to advance new ideas, to manage change, to work with partners, we have relaunched our cultural optimisation program known as Good Soldiering. Good Soldiering as a program sets out the behaviours of our profession, importantly centred on the fundamentals of establishing high-performance teams. These teams may be within our army or our joint force, but just as often they will be with a partner in the region, with defence industry to develop a new capability, or a non-government organisation assisting in disaster relief. Developing people who can contribute to and, where appropriately, lead multidisciplinary teams operating in cross-cultural environments is key to enabling people as our capability advantage. Of course, this is what we're doing here at LANPAC as well. Enabling people-to-people links as the foundation of technical and tactical interoperability, as the foundation of trust. I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about the Australian Army, an army in motion, and an engaged, agile and innovative land force for the Indo-Pacific. Part of a defence force and nation with a commitment to a transparent, rules-based system that benefits the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you to all of you for what you all do and for your own commitment to these same goals. Thank you and good soldiering. All right, we've got a couple of questions here. Let me just read these. Are they in order of... Okay, what recommendations do you have for the US Army to ensure that multi-domain operations leverages the unique capabilities of allies and partners? Okay, great question. So I have a saying that regardless of the question or regardless of the problem, the answer is relationships. And it's so true literally for every problem or every dilemma that's out there. You can't begin to solve complex problems without having the diversity of thinking, the diversity of representation on your team to try and figure it out, let alone ultimately turn that solution or that idea into a solution. So it is what we're doing here. It is about partnerships, it is about coming together to share understanding of both challenges and opportunities, to allow us to build trust through relationships and that shared understanding, to understand how we can all contribute uniquely based on our own capabilities, our own perspectives, our own positions in the world. We will always see the world differently from where we are, and respecting that from the outset is obviously key. But understanding what everyone brings to a team, whether that be 2 people or 20 countries, it doesn't matter. Everyone's got something unique to add to the situation at hand. So I think for the US Army, it's about continuing that very strong and very open and very inclusive engagement, about listening and understanding and being inclusive. And I think you are 99% of the way there. Absolutely, please keep it up and creating that positive environment for us all to come together and figure out these complex challenges together and add everything from different perspectives to different capabilities through time and space and varying levels of each of these strategic challenges. It's a very leading question. Okay, so I'll summarise the question about, hey, what can we do to make sure that we move beyond just goodwill, but to visible action? That's very complicated, right? So these complex challenges, there's no single solution, no silver bullet. They start with, again, shared understanding and building institutions that support upholding the rules-based order and making sure that we have institutions that where we can come together and discuss these matters and have a basis of rules and laws that help us uphold them, whether they be on the sea, like our navies do in understanding protocols for operating well in a congested space, and making sure that things don't become unnecessarily complex on the sea, through to the way nations might behave economically or behaviourally on the ground. So I think that is a great whole meal question. On the ground, militaries should work together to implement national policies, not make up our own. But our engagement program and our collective show of resolve is I think, the best thing that we can do. And moving from bilateral exercises which build that foundation of trust and cohesion, and over time expanding those to multinational and multilateral exercises helps to thicken and strengthen and broaden the base of learning from each other as we feel comfortable in doing so. And I think, again, we see a great evolution of that logic playing out in our own region, where we are doing more and more together at a pace and scale that everyone is comfortable with. Any more questions out there? What was my greatest takeaway after serving as a Deputy Commanding General of the US Army Pacific? Do you really want to know that? Is Frank here? Frank? Yeah. Hey, look, I tell you what an amazing experience it was, and it demonstrated trust, and what a genuine partnership is all about. When you can invite someone from another country to operate at that level within your own organisation, was incredibly powerful expression of trust and a mature partnership. And to use that wisely and to good effect, I think was a profound takeaway for me, and it was on the basis of that experience here, which I am eternally grateful for, that has allowed me to continue to build on those friendships and those relationships that I built through this experience on into my time as the Deputy Chief, and now as the Chief in our own Army, where we can continue exactly what I just mentioned about strengthening multilateral and bilateral and multilateral relationships by having a deeper understanding of the complexity of the issues out there in the world, by looking at it through other people's eyes and lenses, was a fantastic takeaway. And building just that great group of friends and partners, and to be a living example of our 100 years of mateship and our alliance was a great privilege and a great takeaway, and very grateful. Now, I'm very pleased that we continue that with General Dan McDaniel down here as the fourth person to continue that. And I say thank you again to General Brown, but also obviously the Chief of Staff of the Army for his ongoing support for this initiative. And I think we represent more than Australia when we do this. We represent another perspective. When people talk about diversity, to me it's so much more than some of the narrow definitions of what diversity means. Just having different ways of thinking, other perspectives on your team is incredibly powerful. And I think just having another voice, another mind on the team that might think differently or just represent another point of view is incredibly powerful for making good decisions with the complexity of the problems that we face today. The more that we're in this all together, the better we all are. Might leave it there. Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, General Burr. It's always great to hear from a Chief of Army and learn a bit about an Army in motion. I suspect all armies are in motion, but certainly the Australian Army is in much motion. And I was struck by your comment that being a good partner, being in a good relationship begins with listening. Sometimes we don't do that very well. That's a very good reminder. If I could ask the next panel to move on up to the stage. We've heard a couple of times today about some voices concerned about as the United States Army moves forward and modernization and multi-domain operations, the challenges involved in that of interoperability with allies, partners as we move forward. General Burr reminded us that the pace of change is ever increasing. I guess another way to say that is that the pace of change, the change that we are experiencing today, is the slowest change that we will experience in our lifetime as we move forward. And I think that's certainly a clear challenge for our next panel to address land force, increased interoperability with allies and partners. And we do have a great panel assembled to address this topic. Our panel chair is the current Deputy Commander of U.S. Army Pacific North, Major General Dan McDaniel, and you'll see he is not wearing an American uniform. And the panel will be moderated by Lieutenant General Mick Bednarik, Vice President, Contingency Operations, the Floor Government Group. General Bednarik, General McDaniel, off to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir. Hey, General Ham, again, as always, thanks for the introduction of this group. So, hey, listen, this is the third panel for the day, the final panel for the day, and after we wrap up, we'll turn it back over to General Ham, and the only thing left between all of us and as a team here is the Rumfire Bar down on the first deck on the first floor. So. Hey, you've heard about the strategic environment. It was our first panel. Then we talked about joint operations and the multi-domain activities on their second panel. And as General Ham highlighted, this one kind of focuses on our increased interoperability with our partners and allies. And so we're after lunch. And many of you have enjoyed a good full meal. But I'd highlight for those back in the $1 section back there, can you hear us all right? Okay, get a thumbs up from the aid mafia back there for all the generals. Hey, listen, General Ham and also General Rick Burr mentioned about listening. And so as you listen to this panel, I charge all of you to be thinking of the questions to ask this august group. We've got we've got an all-star panel, and I'm not going to introduce them all. You've got access to their bios, but be thinking about a tough, difficult interoperability question to ask. Thinking is hard. That's why so few people do it. So I'd ask you to be planning and leaning forward and leaning ahead. Hey, listen, we're going to hear about training. We're going to hear about exercises of what we have done together in the Indo-Pacific region. We're going to hear a lot of diversity about niche capabilities. We're going to hear some about peacekeeping operations as we move forward and improve together in our partnership and allies across the Indo-Pacific region. With that short intro, I'm going to turn it over to Major General McDaniel highlight, and each of our members will have about 5 to 7 minutes or so to walk through their areas, and then we'll open it up to some good questions. Dan, over to you, sir.
Thanks, sir. Thanks very much. It is a great pleasure for me to be up here, and particularly with this group of panelists. Really pleased that the panel has come together the way that it has, and I think there'll be some fascinating perspectives for everyone up here this afternoon. I do thank you all for staying. There's no surf out there; it's flattened out, so you might as well stay in here. It'll be a good afternoon. But look, and I just want to fall in on what the Chief of the Australian Army just said, and I think certainly I feel this quite strongly, having been in this role as Deputy Commanding General North in USAPAC now for 4 months, that it is absolutely about trust. I almost feel that I could sit here and actually not say anything and just be a demonstration of interoperability amongst allies and partners, because I think this position is a great demonstration of that, and I think it's to the great credit of the United States Army and those in leadership positions before that this position exists. Great foresight, and I think the credit really is in that the US Army and USAPAC, where I am, that organisation is not concerned about what I see in terms of the problems that it faces, because USAPAC views them as our problems to be faced together, and USAPAC welcomes the different perspectives. They certainly welcome my perspectives, and the headquarters, I know, welcomes the perspectives of all of the nations that are in this room, and indeed across the world. It's a learning organisation, and I think that the word trust is apt. It's certainly not afraid to show its shortcomings and ask for assistance as to how those can be dealt with. Look, interoperability is always on our list of objectives, and you've heard it a number of times today. It's about building on our strengths, about mitigating our weaknesses, and as General Brown and others have said today, we're not going to go it alone in the future. We're going to work very closely with allies, partners and friends across the endeavours that we have. So we certainly view in the US Army that interoperability at some level is a necessity. But I suppose I would ask the question, and really the thematic that I have for my brief comments before we move on to the other panellists' perspective is, what is that level? And how do we arrive at that level? And at what cost? And whether we really fully appreciate all of the factors that have to come together to go into interoperability. As I said, at a personal level, personal relationships are very important. I've certainly benefited from those in the past. I have been on exchange with the US military before in a different role, and indeed with the British Army in the past. And I have felt the great value of those different opportunities on combat operations where, lo and behold, I've run into somebody that I was working closely with on one of those exchanges, and we've been able to work together to solve problems that until that time had been, for whatever reason, unsolvable. I've seen it at play at a very, very personal level, but there are other, there are other aspects to interoperability. I would offer that we go pretty quickly to a conversation about equipment, and I'm not quite sure that we have probably the deeper conversations that we need to have before we get to the hardware. Whether that's about the legalities, the policies, the training, the maintenance, all of those things that really do need to come together, the subject matter exchanges and exchanges of expertise to make interoperability a reality. So I think what I would offer is that equipment and hardware is almost the last conversation, and that we should be having a number of other conversations really before we get to that point. Equipment is the means to an end and not necessarily the end in itself. There are countries that are in this audience right now where I would say before we get to hardware we should be talking about even things as basic as a robust English language program to build to make sure that we can get to training and policy that's actually going to enable the equipment that we think needs to be acquired. So I think I would offer that it's really key to defining what the capability need is, and I know you would sort of sit there and say, well, of course, and I would say that too, but I would offer that I don't think it's happening as often as it should. As we look at the range of challenges that we have, we've heard about them through the course of today, really teasing out what those challenges are, the key aspects of those challenges, and going to the capability requirements that we need to face them in a collective sense would be, I think, a really important start point. And as I said, I'm not sure it's the start point that we have often enough. The US has doctrine for this. I think it's limited in my observation, and I think we could do better with it. So there is doctrine around defining levels of interoperability, and certainly something that I will work on in this position is to better assist the partners and allies that I work with to understand that. Better agreeing the need and the gap that we're trying to fill is central, and as I've said, this is more than just hardware. I see often policy impediments that maybe we didn't see coming, that we might have seen coming had we had a deeper conversation earlier in the process. Now this all needs to fit with national interest and national objectives. There will be certain things that nations will want to pursue quite rightly as part of the national interest and national objectives. But as we talk about the challenges that we face, and there are numerous examples of the US working together with countries like Australia to maybe define where Australia is wanting to take an army capability and work our MDO capability to look at where there are crossovers and look at where we might be able to mitigate gaps that the Australian Army might have as it pursues its cross-domain capability. So I think I'll hold it there, but I suppose to summarise, I'd say that I think a better mutual understanding of capabilities and levels of interoperability would go a long way to treating the gaps and the risks that we have, doubling down on strengths and mitigating weaknesses. And I think we would, by doing this, we'd achieve better solutions that are probably more fit for purpose and hopefully would have dual use application both in terms of combat power and combat application, but also to deal with those things that happen more often on the humanitarian assistance and indeed dealing with the disasters that are a pretty common feature of this region.
Yeah,
Thanks very much.
Hey, Dan, thanks for starting us off. I'll turn it over to our senior Marine on deck. Lou, over to you, sir. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. General Ham, sir, thank you, and AUSA for allowing me to be here. General Brown, thank you, sir, for being a great partner. I didn't realize there was a clock up here. I'm assuming green is good, red is bad.
And
the
black
fact
is a
that
no-go, yeah.
Dan didn't flinch means you don't get shocked if you go into the red.
Yeah, and we're not in body armor, so it's all okay.
I'm in the green as far as I can see.
So I'm happy to offer my perspective on how land forces build interoperability. We've got 90,000 Marines assigned to the Indo-Pacific region, more than 22,000 of those west of the international date line. And of course, we've got a long history in the region as a Marine Corps. And we think that having 22,000 Marines west of the international date line is a big part of our success in the region. And part of the reason we're there, obviously, is to meet treaty obligations. But the other reason is defined really by training, by exercises, and by what has been mentioned here on numerous occasions, the opportunity to build relationships and to build readiness, lethality, and interoperability across our military. And a key component of interoperability we see is those relationships, and I think we've seen that hold true over time. And I think the ability of the forces and the nations in this room to operate together is a key source of strength and security in the region. Historically, we've focused on Marine forces in the region. There's 7 Marine Corps in the region. Second to that, obviously, is Marine-like forces, and there's a host of different countries that are building Marine-like or naval infantry-type forces. But we have not been limited by that, and we exercise and partner. We actually have enduring relationships and recurring exercises with several of countries that don't have Marine or Marine-like forces in the region. And just a couple prominent, probably most recent examples. So we look at the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force and the establishment of the Amphibious Rapid Deployment Brigade side by side with our Marine forces, and able to increase interoperability and build, quite frankly, a capability in the Japanese self-defense forces that is still growing today. We look at the Australian Defence Force and the amphibious capability development that we've done with them, and the partnership that we have, participation in the Indo-Pacific endeavor. And I think these are 2 real perfect examples of how we've partnered with land forces, increased interoperability, and in these 2 cases as well, expanded capability. And we have now common tactics, techniques, and procedures, and that means we can expand roles in the region. In addition to the Australian Defence Force amphibious capability, our countries have a 25-year agreement between our governments to have a rotational force in Darwin. And we rotate that force annually, and we partner, frankly, with the most ready Australian Defence Force units. We execute high-end training side by side, and as we've seen this develop over the last 7 years, it's opened the door to additional opportunities, multilateral training events with allies and partners, and again, just expanded much more broadly the interoperability between our forces, and that really is a reality today. And I think as a Marine Corps, you know, we're the smallest of the U.S. Armed Forces, and we're part of the naval force, so I think we perhaps have a unique perspective relative to interoperability. We don't do sustained operations ashore without relying on the United States Army. We rely on the Navy for tactical and operational maneuver at sea, and we share concepts across the joint force. But as has been mentioned here earlier, we don't share necessarily all the same hardware, but hardware is not the most important thing. Most of the time, it's the relationships. We advertise our Corps in the joint force, and I would say in the region as an enabler. And we see ourselves working in conjunction with both joint U.S. capabilities as well as alongside our allies and partners. And all of our concepts, if you dig into them, focus on enabling the joint and the combined force. And then perhaps to sum it up before I go into the red, I just offer, you know, a comment on, you know, the MAR 4-pack strategy, if you will, aligned with the NSS and the NDS, to look at two things: threats and opportunities. And I think the focus of LANPAC and the reason that we're here is to seek those additional opportunities to expand on opportunities that exist today and to make the region more secure for the future. So that's my pitch. I have 23 seconds left. I look forward to your questions.
Lou, you are a go in watching the time clock, so that's keeping us on track. Hey, we're blessed to have General Aziz here, our senior leader from Bangladesh Army. Sir, over to you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us this afternoon.
I think I will take his 22 seconds. General Brown, distinguished panelists, and dear audience, good afternoon. It is indeed an honor for me to be here amongst a group of leading military professionals. I intend to talk primarily focused on interoperability in United Nations peace operations from the perspective of Bangladesh Army. However, I shall also focus a little bit on the interoperability aspect of Bangladesh Army with our partners and allies in context of combat operations. Dear audience, Bangladesh Army came into being during the country's War of Liberation in 1971. Even at the inception, the Army fought as part of Indo-Bangladesh Allied Force. Subsequently, conduct of a prolonged and successful counterinsurgency operation in a region among people of diverse ethnicity made the organization of Bangladesh Army more seasoned to operate professionally where language and cultural difference remains a major barrier. Today's interoperability standing of Bangladesh Army is the result of more than 30 years of our participation in United Nations peace operations, persistent efforts, dedications, motivations, and cultural adoption. Ladies and gentlemen, I shall talk on main three heads as flashed on the screen. Overseas employment other than United Peace Operations. Other than peacekeeping missions, the first time Bangladesh Army had been exposed to large-scale multinational experience was during Operation Desert Storm in 1990 in Iraq, where a brigade-sized Bangladeshi force participated in the coalition. Since then, Bangladesh Army has been continuing its participation in the region until today by contributing her troops under Operation Reconstruction of Kuwait. So far, 22,222 Bangladeshi Army combatants have operated in these operations. Recently, Bangladesh Army has signed a Memorandum of Understanding with Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, under which we are preparing to send 2 contingents of minesweepers to sweep landmines in the Saudi bordering areas. Bangladesh believes this engagement will further enhance our standard of interoperability through integration and cooperation. Till date, more than 155,000 Bangladeshi peacekeepers took part in 54 peacekeeping missions in 40 countries. Such long engagement helped us achieving capability of operating in any challenging environment. Currently, Bangladesh contingents are operating smoothly as part of a heterogeneous force in Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Mali, and Central Africa Republic. Based on our experience, let me highlight few challenges of interoperability in peace operations. These are conceptualization of the problem, absence of appropriate representation of troops contributing countries at different levels, starting from Department of Peace Operations at UN headquarters, where the conceptualization of the mission takes place, turns out as a limitation for the participating nation in preparing their forces well in time, especially in terms of equipping and interoperability issues. More often, interoperability develops after contingent deploy in mission areas at the cost of operation readiness. Then, diverse philosophical orientation. Peace operation missions normally have 3 segments: civilians, military, and police. Success of any mission relies on synergy among the action of these components. At times, military command philosophies contradicts with broader philosophy of the mission given by the special representative of the Secretary General, in short SRSG. This contradiction add challenge to integration domain of interoperability in the mission area. The third one, social construct, varied outlook of the deployed forces towards local culture, values, and social practices affect the cooperation aspect of interoperability. Next, functional challenges. In the functional domain, lack of integration of is generally noticed mainly due to diverse training system of the contingents based on own doctrinal orientation and non-interoperable operable equipment of contingent from different countries. Now, how Bangladesh Army is addressing these challenges? Obviously, the commitment of Bangladesh government towards restoring the international peace has been a prime mover behind all the endeavor of Bangladesh Army. First, equipping the forces. Timely equipping of forces prior to deployment in mission areas is one of the greatest challenge. Bangladesh Army has developed an organizational foresightness in assessing the type and quantity of equipment likely to be deployed in upcoming peace operations. Then respect towards cultural diversity stems from practice at home. It is the key to success for working in multinational environment. Bangladesh as a nation inherited rich culture. Cultural pluralism is embedded in our national character. As such, our peacekeepers have always effortlessly shown respect to other culture while operating in multinational environment. Bangladesh Army conducts extensive theoretical and practical training in Bangladesh Institute of Peace Support Operation Training and under respective formation, where mission mandate, concept of operations, and rules of engagement are deliberately explained and rehearsed. Over the years, Bangladesh Institute of Peace Support Operation Training has been generating opportunity for large-scale engagement of Bangladesh Army with multinational partners through conduct of joint multinational exercises in collaboration with United States, Indo-Pacific Command and Global Peace Operation initiated by United States Department. Our Overseas Operation Directorate at Army Headquarters analyzes all feedbacks and after-action review of peace operation and modify the training curricula of peace operations. Besides our own doctrine, we learn doctrine of our allies and partner countries through exchange program. Now I shall now few sorry. Now, some of the suggestions I'm going to make. First one is the functional capability building. Joint exercise are the appropriate method of identifying interoperability gaps and implement required measures. Therefore, more number of joint exercise may be planned amongst Indo-Pacific land forces at regular interval to enhance the interoperability of the forces. Second one, capacity building. Issues like technology transfer, access defense article transfer, knowledge sharing, increased exchange program, and collaboration in operations other than war can contribute in capacity building of armies of the developing nations. A thoughtful gesture of the technologically advanced militaries in terms of technological capacity building through technology transfer can serve as one step forward towards enhancing interoperability of the developing countries. And the last one, enhanced cooperation among prevalent training institutions within Indo-Pacific countries may be considered as a tool to increase interoperability. The cooperation may range from conducting collective seminars, exchange program, both in terms of delivering training package and faculty exchange, research and development, etc. Special attention may be given on the issues of interoperability aspect that will simultaneously make the force ready to undertake both peace operations and combat operation if situation demands. With that, I must mention that increased interoperability shall always stay unique as a judging parameter of measuring the level of preparedness of any force to undertake any operational responsibilities in support of the partner countries. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, General Aziz, thank you. And General Brown, as you know, maybe our General Aziz and our Bangladesh teammates will be part of the future Pacific Pathways activities going forward in the future. So, sir, we look forward to that. Our next panel member, looking forward to his comments, Lieutenant General Onizuka from Japan and the Japanese Ground Self-Defense Force, one of the senior leaders. Sir, over to you, please. Thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm Lieutenant General Onozuka, Vice Chief of Staff, Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, or JGSDF. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this wonderful symposium as a panelist. General Klaparotta mentioned about amphibious readiness deployment brigade of JGSDF. Today, I'm going to share the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force efforts on improving Japan-U.S. interoperability from the perspective of a country allied with the United States in the northeastern Asian region. Concerning the current security environment in the Indo-Pacific region, which is becoming increasingly severe and uncertain at an alarming rate, the Cabinet approved the National Defense Program Guidelines of 2018, established in December. These guidelines prescribe Japan's future defense capability and target levels of desired defense forces. It is decided that Japan will create a truly effective defense force, specifically a multi-domain defense force. The guidelines state that we are going to strengthen Japan's defense structure, as well as the Japan-US alliance and security cooperation. In particular, the Japan-US alliance, together with Japan's own defense structure, is a cornerstone for Japan's security. Also, given that the alliance plays a significant role of peace and security in the Indo-Pacific region and internationally as well, we recognize that we need to even further strengthen the Japan-US alliance. Therefore, it is necessary to strengthen Japan-US interoperability and execute Japan-US bilateral operations effectively and efficiently. It is particularly important to focus on strengthening interoperability between the ground forces of Japan and the US, because our ground capabilities can play a role integrating and exercising the combat power of other operational domains, as General Brown mentioned this morning. Under the recognition that JGSDF has been conducting a variety of efforts to increase interoperability with the US Army and the US Marine Corps in such realms as tactics and procedures, intelligence and communication systems, and personal exchanges. Today, our time is limited, so I'd like to introduce you to the JGSDF efforts to improve interoperability, focusing on tactics and procedures. As for executing Japan-US bilateral operations, it is important for the JGSDF to establish from peacetime the posture to fight together with the US Army and the US Marine Corps. And it is extremely important to strengthen interoperability at every level by learning through bilateral training the tactics and procedures of both sides, characteristics of organization and equipment, and strong points and weak points. So we have been working to improve bilateral operational capabilities through bilateral training inside and outside of Japan. At the same time, given the drastic changes in the security environment around Japan, coupled with the necessity to realize operational capability in growing domains such as cyberspace, cyber, and electromagnetic warfare, it is important for the future defense of Japan for us to align cross-domain tactics and procedures of Japan and the United States. I know I'm repeating myself, but under NDPG, National Defense Program Guideline 2018, Japan will establish a multi-domain defense force. The basic concept of a multi-domain defense force is to execute cross-domain operations, which is a similar direction to multi-domain operations that the US Army has been working on. I recognize that the US Marine Corps is also considering expeditionary advanced-based operations. I hope these concepts will advance in the same direction with cooperation amongst the JGSDF, the US Army, and the US Marine Corps. On another note, we have seen definition progress recently. As part of last year's LANPAC exercise, we conducted a bilateral field training exercise highlighted by an anti-ship live fire utilizing JGSDF surface-to-ship missile units, US Army HIMARS, high-mobility artillery rocket systems, and UAVs, and Japan Maritime Self-Defense Forces P3 Charlie. That was the first bilateral anti-ship field training exercise with live fire, and the training carried great significance for the concept of island defense. We will continue to verify bilateral concepts through each bilateral training experience in order to realize Japan-US bilateral capability in cross-domain warfighting. As the security environment in the Indo-Pacific region becomes even more severe, the Japan-US alliance accordingly becomes more and more important. As JGF is in order to contribute to the peace and stability of the Indo-Pacific region, we will continue to make efforts to strengthen interoperability with the US Army and the US Marine Corps in order to establish the posture to fight together. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sir, thank you very much. Our cleanup batter, or we don't save the best for last. Jeff is just the last for last. But I'm even after you, so that's the last of the last. So, hey, our Commanding General, United States Army Security and Assistance Command is going to talk and educate us all. He knows more about security assistance, foreign military sales than anybody in the room. Jeff, over to you, sir. Thanks.
Thank you, General Ham, General Brown. Thank you for the invitation to come out and speak to this panel. Thank you to my panel members. Great pitches, each and every one of you. And thank you for keeping it on time. I felt like I may have to call out my pitch like an auctioneer and try to make it go pretty quickly. And also thank you to my new best friend, General Onizuka, who after last night at General Brown's get-together, we discovered we'd worked together in the past. It's quite interesting connecting that way. So as General Bednarik said, I command United States Army Security Assistance Command. It's an organization of about 1,500 people based in Huntsville, Alabama. And we are one of 4 implementing agencies in the Army that execute the FMS process. And so we are, it's like the Ohio State. We are the one. We execute 95% of the Army's foreign military sales programs in USASAC to the tune of about $51 billion worth of revenue. So foreign military sales is a complex system, and there are 3 main players that work together to achieve the desired effects of the partner nation and of the alliances. The first is the U.S. government. So the community here is United States Army Security Assistance Command. The security cooperation officers that are posted forward into our partner nations and partnered with the militaries there. The Army Service Component Commands operating within Indo-PACOM, and the combatant commands. And so the role of the U.S. government representation is to work with the countries toward what's called an actionable letter of request. And so really the process is that we work from what's it for to what it is, instead of what it is, and then that's where you stop. So we're trying to figure out what kind of capability the country is interested in building, and then that will naturally lend itself to what the end item ends up being. And so once we realize what the end item is going to be, whether it's a helicopter or some sort of combat vehicle or whatever, we have system-specific checklists conveniently posted on the USASAC website that will allow us to get to very specific, actionable requirements. The second party that's involved is, of course, the allies and partner nations. Within USASAC, we have a country program manager that is assigned to each nation. 1 CPM to 1 nation, and the relationship is there with security cooperation offices and the partner nation. And once again, that's to get us down to from what it's for to what it is. And as we're building the package for what it is, we like to use what's called the total package concept. And so when you purchase from the United States and do FMS with the United States, you don't get a helicopter that's going to sit in a hangar as soon as it breaks down. You are going to get a total package, and that includes spare parts, that includes publications, that includes training, maintenance training, that includes training on how to employ the end item that you purchased. All of these things are bundled together and included in a total package for the country to consider. And so I would ask, as we're doing that, where we're considering spare parts provisioning, we make sure that we buy into the U.S. Army supply system using cooperative logistics. And so when we do that, the bricks of interoperability are laid in language, procedures, training, and they're all, as you build up, That's how you build interoperability, whether it's true interoperability all the way through to compatibility at the other end of the scale. These are important steps, and so we encourage to use the competitive advantage of the United States, which is the total package concept when building your requirements. The third grouping is the industry partner. So as we're writing requirements, it's okay to involve industry. Industry is going to have information that maybe the security cooperation officer might not have, the country might not have, and I know industry is out there. They're talking to countries, they're talking to militaries, they're showing what they can do, they're showing what their products can do. That's okay. We need their help to write requirements as well. So what this does is when you have industry help write the requirements, and we get very good requirements, we go to what's called a pricing and availability process after we receive the letter of request. And the better the requirements, the shorter the time it will take to get the pricing and availability completed, and that will shrink down the timeline associated with acquiring equipment. Second, from industry partners, is ensure you have the capacity to meet Army and international requirements, not just Army requirements. There are capacity shortfalls out there in certain sectors, and the demand for U.S. defense products is not going to go down. It's only going to go up. And thirdly, on the part of industry partners, maintain the supply chain, maintain a robust supply chain from primary suppliers down to second and third tier suppliers to make sure that you can supply both Army and industry partners with parts that build readiness. I yield the floor with 1 minute and 18 seconds remaining. Winning.
Well, Jeff, that means you get the prize, which is extra rations at dinner, I think. Hey, so thanks for maintaining the standard. We got some real good questions for the panel, and I appreciate everybody working through that. And if there are a few others, we've got a little bit of extra time since we started a bit early, so we'll go through all these. And General Aziz, the first question from the audience, sir, goes to you. And it talks about a couple things, and the question goes like this. The United States Army is investing heavily to address a lot of different capability shortfalls, capability gaps. In Bangladesh, what key capabilities do you see your ground forces investing in?
As far as interoperability, with regards to United Peacekeeping operations are concerned, in our country we have training institutions. It is in short the BIPSERT, where United States they contribute in terms of financial support, and sometimes they also provide subject matter expert. But what we do is that, based on our vast experience of working more than 30 years in different peacekeeping operations, as I have mentioned that we have participated in 40 different countries. So whatever experience that we have gathered, so we have try to implement all those things into the training curricula, and from across the globe, more than 29 countries, they send their trainers or the participants in their training, peace support training institutions, where we do conduct a training, and that is always based on our latest experience that we gather, and how this interoperability in different mission environment can be effectively implemented. That is, we try to bring out through the training.
Yeah, sir. Thanks for sharing that with us. You and your team and the country and your forces do a heck of a lot more in peacekeeping operations than a vast majority of our other partners and allies. So I thank you for your comments. The next question, Jeff, let's throw this out to you. And the question from the audience is this: given the important role foreign military sales has to enable partner nations' capability and the current speed of global changes and challenges, what can USASAC, United States Army Security Assistance Command, do to shorten timeline when we identify a need to the execution of a foreign military sales case? Over to you, Jeff.
Well, I would say that sort of the number one item of feedback that we get is that FMS is too slow. So FMS is a strategic approach to building capability. It's not going to solve a tactical problem. However, that being said, I am always looking for ways to shorten the timeline. The first is, I would say, the contracting timeline takes an extraordinarily long time. Now, that being said, once again, one of the competitive advantages of using United States FMS is the integrity of our contracting process. And so, when we talk to partner nations, often the question comes up of how do you do this? Well, we have an approved contracting process that takes a little bit longer, but it ends up in the right result, and the result is unprotestable and impervious to corruption. I would say the contracting timeline is probably the biggest way we could get after it.
Hey, Jeff, thanks. I appreciate that one. Next question, Lou, we're going to throw one your way. Question from the audience of Marine formations. So, and Lou, as you and I talk, Marine formations are organized differently than many of the region's land forces, and you touched on it in your comments earlier. But as MAR4 Packer, Marine Forces Pacific, how do you approach increasing interoperability with our allies and partners around the region? Lou, over to you, sir.
Yeah, so I guess, as I mentioned in the opening comments, we start probably with Marines and Marine-like forces, but because we have the capability to operate across the range of military operations and do sustained operations ashore, we have existing relationships with all the armies in the region. So I think we look at it based on our organization as an air-ground task force, as perhaps that we have a different perspective on joint. The fact that our command elements are built around an intel, a comm, and a radio battalion gives us cyber, EW, and some other capabilities to operate in all the domains. So I think we just look for opportunities where perhaps what General Aziz talked about when he said functional capacity building, where people are looking at specific functions. We look at the size of the force and the fact that we task organize and we're a little bit more scalable. That's sort of our approach. And if somebody has a desire to build a capacity and the ability to operate alongside of us, we typically will jump at the opportunity. I will say, and I've mentioned this to a couple folks that I met today, it does become, and I think several of our partners in the room might feel the same way. At some point it becomes a capacity issue, not a desire issue, because more exercises is not necessarily to the benefit of everybody, which is why we look for multilateral opportunities, number one, and then we look at perhaps small exchanges where the benefit of the interaction maybe is much greater than the actual input to the exercise. So that's sort of how we approach it. We get get input, we make some evaluation, we look at readiness, and then again, based on capability, scale to the desires of the partner or ally.
Hey, sir, thanks. Great response to that, and a lot of challenges associated not only with the organization of the forces that we have, but how they can link together to accomplish a common goal. General Onizuka, this question goes to you from the audience, kind of twofold. The first one has to do with the bilateral back in RIMPAC in 2018. And how significant was it for Japan to conduct that bilateral anti-ship combat training during that RIMPAC 18 exercise? Sir, over to you.
Okay. For the people living in non-English speaking world, the language is the most challenging things. So please forgive me to use interpreter. 昨年海軍州の世界的な規模の演習であるリンパックに SSM 地対艦ミサイルの部隊が参加をしました。
So in the last RIMPAC 2018, our surface missile unit battery called SSM has participated in the live fire exercise.
これは日米陸軍種の共同対艦戦闘能力を向上させただけではなくて、海上自衛隊との統合による対艦戦闘能力、これの向上を図ることができました。
This live fire exercise had the meaning not only this was a joint exercise, the combined exercise between the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force and the U.S. Army, but also was the venue for Ground Self-Defense Force to exercise the joint operation between Maritime Self-Defense Force.
加えまして、日米両国がこの地域の平和と安定のために大きな努力を傾注していることを地域に対して発信することができたと思います。
Another significance of this live fire exercise was that Japan could demonstrate the commitment in conjunction with the U.S. forces to the peace and stability of the region.
具体的には海上自衛隊の P3C が入手をした目標情報に基づいて日米が共同して調整をし、それぞれがそれぞれの手段を持って対艦攻撃をするということが初めて実射訓練を持って実施をすることができました。
What we could have achieved in this live fire exercise, more specifically, was that we flight Maritime Self-Defense Force P3 Charlie patrol aircraft, which acquired target information. Then processed those target informations bilaterally between the Japanese and U.S. forces, sent it to the firing unit, and actually launch a missile. This was the very first experience for those forces, and that was a significant achievement, as I think.
まだまだ改善すべき点も多くありますので、引き続きこのリンパックへの参加の対応進化をさせて、地域に対してアメリカとともに強いメッセージを発信をしていきたいというふうに思っています。
So I personally think there are lots of things to do. We can do more in the future RIMPAC exercise or other opportunities. We'd like to strengthen and improve our tactical procedures and also taking advantage of this RIMPAC exercise and other venues and opportunities to send a strong message, strategic message out to the world and the region.
Thank you.
Hey, sir, thank you very much. Hey, Dan, this next question from the audience goes to you. Great question here. And from your experience as one of the deputies in the United States Army Pacific, from your experiences in working with the United States Army, what are the most important unilateral problems that we need to fix to enable improved interoperability going forward. Sir, over to you.
I'd probably say that and it relates a little bit to the question about speed on foreign military sales. I'm not sure speed is the right question. I think it's about information, and the US military is a big beast, backed by a big, political machine and government machine, and I think it's can be confusing and difficult for other nations really to understand what's going on as they're working with the US military, and I'll say the military and not just the army. But I think a better understanding of the dynamics, and I think a better flow of information across a range of issues would be useful for nations working with the US military. I know, having worked on one hand on the Australian side, and whether it was major exercises, or indeed foreign military sales, which I was involved in from the Australian side, understanding all of the levers was really, really difficult. In the 4 months that I've been inside the machine, in a sense, I would say I have a vaguely better understanding of all of the levers. I don't understand necessarily how they all interact, but what I've found is that through conversations, with the likes I've had with Jeff down the end, and many others, is I have a much better understanding of the impediments and the difficulties that indeed the US military faces within its own system. And I think if some of those difficulties were to be shared in the same way that they've been shared with me, and they're not particularly sensitive, I think that would go a long way to helping nations understand why the US military does what it does, and indeed why the foreign military sales mechanism sort of executes the way it does, and indeed at the speed that it does.
Sir, thank you. Hey, we've got a little over 2 minutes left. Let me highlight a couple things that are not only precepts here by the panel, but also teed up by Lieutenant General Rick Burr, our keynote this afternoon. Hey, listen, everybody, interoperability is tough, and the global complexities make it even tougher. And I think the point that Dan just highlighted, and Jeff certainly did with foreign military sales, technology is never going to offset the interoperability challenges. It's not going to be perfect. But again, as Dan, as your boss highlighted, and Lieutenant General Burr mentioned, relationships bridge the gap, and that's really a key for the long term. General Brown highlighted and kind of told us all, joint interagency, intergovernmental, multinational framework, and working those relationships are really key. A couple thanks and shout outs, General Ham, certainly to you and the AUSA team and USERPAC for hosting this symposium. And also a shout out, Dan, to you and your team. He was really the catalyst at the senior level coordinations, pulling this together. And especially Lieutenant Colonel Rivenbark. James, where are you? Okay, teammate over there, USERPAC G37 at the USERPAC headquarters. Shout out to you, sir, for all the work that you did in coordinating on this. General Ham, sir, that concludes our panel for the afternoon, and thanks everybody for your questions.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thanks, General Bednarik, and thanks for the whole panel. It's a good wrap-up, I think, and the consistency of the theme hearing this morning, first from General Brown about the importance of relationships. General Burr certainly hammering that away in our final panel today, certainly reinforcing the essential thing that Ramsey reminded us of at the very start. We are all in this together. So thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes day one. Coffee will be available at 0700 tomorrow and we'll start here promptly at 0800 tomorrow morning with General Abrams. Thank you, and have a safe and wonderful evening.
Thanks.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks very much, sir.
Hey, Lou, great.